Welcome back to another Boilers Extra. Nathan Baird from the Indianapolis Star.
Sam King from the Journal and Courier.
And we are taking a break midweek from Purdue preseason camp. I was there on Monday. Both of us were there on Monday. Sam was there on Tuesday. We're going to get his reaction from that in a second because it was the first day that full pads were on. And just to kind of give people lay of the land, Thursday is what we're recording this about, is sort of a look ahead to Thursday because Ryan Walters said Purdue is going to have its first scrimmage of the fall. And by scrimmage, they really mean probably scrimmage periods, like full-on football periods that they haven't really been having yet. We've had a glimpse of a couple of live periods, and for those who follow our coverage and everybody else's coverage, you probably noticed that those are the things that don't show up on video and in photos, and that's because Purdue makes those off limits to those sorts of things. So we have to kind of create visual or word pictures for you for those sorts of things. But we have seen some of those. I don't know if we'll get to see more of that when they do that scrimmage period on Thursday, and then another practice Friday, and then on into next week. Just a couple weeks left after that before the season opener. But Sam, I wanted to get just your impressions yesterday of seeing this, seeing them play real football in some stretches for the first time, so to speak. And I know there were some dust ups as things got started, which, annually when you cover college football, that always seems to happen. And you ask coaches about it later and they're like, yeah, it's good to see guys getting after it. And, they're passionate and they're competitive. And we didn't get to talk to Ryan Walters after that yesterday. Maybe he would have said the same things. I don't know. But just what were your impressions of seeing some live football yesterday?
Yeah, we talked to Adrian Jenkins as we talked to afterwards, and he's like, they've been talking to this point, and you put full pads on these guys. Okay, now you can go hit each other. You're bound to get some, just when you take a lot of testosterone in that, and it's a physical sport, you're going to get some not much fights, but pushing and shoving. Very early. Practice. I know Reggie Love got into it with Salim Turner Muhammad, and there was some shoving. Some guys got knocked down. Coaches said, "Hey, two run laps together," and they're you run laps around the field together, and you talk it out in that period, and both of them high five each other, slap each other on the butt, and run about their day. I think at the end of the day, you remember your teammates. It's also going to get physical, and rather things out of the way and teach these players this is unacceptable, because if you do this in a game, there's going to be a flag and costs us 15 yards. You could definitely tell, especially on the defensive side, they were ready to hit somebody a little bit. A couple things that I liked early on. One thing that anybody who knows anything about football knows: you don't touch the quarterback in these situations. So Hudson Card in the last couple of days has busted a couple of really long runs that look great, but at the same time in a game, you're not just running up and grabbing him and then he's down. In a game, you're trying to knock him on the ground. So it's hard to tell if those are actual 80-yard runs or if those are plays where the defense let up and he just kept going. So
yeah, that's true. Although there also tends to be a quick whistle around the quarterback too. If anybody's in the neighborhood that close, you usually hear a whistle too. So it's somewhere in the middle of that. And the other dynamic I think plays out in preseason camp, and it plays out a little bit in the spring too. But again, people who follow our coverage, that we get sort of like one position group at a time. And sometimes I think, we'll come in on day one. And like, I thought when I came in on day one and I saw the first teams going against each other, I thought the defense like kind of stepped up and like made some plays and was disruptive. You got some good plays out of the secondary. So, people like me write about that. And I don't know how much they're paying attention to this, but like, I do think that sometimes like when the coverage gets out there, then one group will be like, it starts to build some of that, like, well, we have to show you guys. And I think that's where some of that physical back and forth can come into play early on. But again, that's I think something you want to see at this stage of camp is guys who are eager to play football, and they're not attacking each other. They're not hating each other. It's sort of the natural competitive thing. Anybody who's played, guys playing pickup basketball to co-rec have similar vibes, I think, once in a while.
Well, yeah. One thing that kind of irks me, but I understand it, is when you talk to these players, whatever sport it is, you'll typically get everybody thinks, and typically it's not everybody thinks. It's one person wrote this, and you took it
some
as
schmuck like me, some schmuck like you.
The entire media conglomerate believes that, we're not good at this element or we need to get better at this element. But it does get out there. The message gets sent somewhere along the way. Not that, these players probably aren't sitting here and clicking on everything we write and reading it, but the message gets passed down along like, hey, these guys think this or whatever. And, one of the things I brought up with Kevin Kane last year, which was a recurring theme, was the defense looked great last year at getting tackles for loss, getting turnovers, getting sacks. And I've mentioned this before, then you get the big run or the big pass play that completely negates all of the positive things that happen. Then he said, you're absolutely right. That's obviously, we got to keep the ball in front of us, because every time we do that, it eliminates what we do. That's maybe going to tomorrow, where I'd like to see more consistency in the defense. That would be the top target. Is now you've got this makeshift mix of guys coming back for and few attorneys on the defensive side. That working to kind of eliminate the big plays that were problematic for Purdue at times last season.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Like, number one, there are some things that everybody is saying. The consensus of everybody who covers
most people apparently than us, and maybe one or two other people think who's the worst team in the Big Ten. So.
Yeah. They, it wasn't necessarily our votes that sunk them, but everybody else put them number 18 in the Big Ten, like across the board. So that alone should be all the motivation they need. It shouldn't be like one position group against the other. They're kind of saying all your position groups aren't good enough. So again, we already talked about that. We thought that was too low to put them, but regardless, that's something that they'll have to go out and have on their backs a little bit this season. But there are, I think, some groups, some individual positions where it is fair to have some questions, not necessarily even about how good they're going to be, but just like, what's it going to look like? And Ryan Walters, when I asked him on Monday, what do you want Thursday's scrimmage to look like? What do you want it to tell you? It was a lot about separation. It was a lot about who steps up, who kind of starts to take charge at some positions, because it's one thing when you're going through reps. It's one thing when things are somewhat a little bit more predictable. When you get into a game situation, a game-like situation, a competitive situation, and guys have to get taken out of their comfort zone a little bit, who reacts the best there. And I think that Thursday is kind of an important benchmark as camp goes along for guys to start making those separations. So Sam and I are both going to run down, I guess, our top 3 or so positions or things that Purdue wants to find out on Thursday, things Purdue needs to see from Thursday's scrimmage. Sam, you can go first. Just, I guess, what jumps front of mind for you as where Purdue needs to start to figure some things out and how Thursday can help.
Yeah, well, I mentioned the defense, so I'll kind of start there with the secondary. And we all know what Dylan Thieneman did last year. The guy covers a lot of ground. He's in a space where he's got a lot of room to maneuver and kind of read plays, and that's why he had 6 interceptions last year, because of how quick he is and his ability to read defenses. So we know what he can do. One guy who was mentioned yesterday, who I don't think a coach has brought up throughout camp yet, was Kevin Kane mentioned Marcavius Brown, a returning defensive back who was a transfer from Ole Miss last year. He's going to be huge, because we've heard Kendrick Breedlove and we've heard Nyland Green, transfers from Colorado and Georgia respectively, as being guys, but you got to have that other guy as well. So that's Marcavius Brown's probably the X factor in this whole thing. If Green can be the shutdown corner you think he is, if Breedlove is as good as advertised, and then you have that third plus Thieneman, that could be a really good group. And going back to those big plays last year, you hopefully take out 1 or 2 of those a game, and that was the difference between being a bowl team and not last year, quite honestly.
Just to kind of enumerate this, I was tracking the units on the defensive units on Monday, and this has been the way it's been, I think, set up through most of camp. But it was Brown and Green, which I just now realized is interesting. To have the color names on at the 2 outside corner spots. You had Kendrick Breedlove then at, I guess, your slot corner, nickel, whatever you want to call that. And then I think it was Joseph Jefferson who was playing that sort of rover spot ahead of Dylan Thieneman. That was with the 1s. And then with the 2s, let me make sure I can read my writing here. I didn't really plan to have to go through this. I think it was Alessandro and Derek Rogers as the corners with the 2s, and And
Those guys
then
became starters at the end of last year by
right.
circumstance when injuries happened.
And then Salim Turner Muhammad was, I guess, the slot DB there, and then the nickel, or whatever you want to call it, and then Trey Smith as the more hybrid spot. So I think there's good depth there. And then obviously, as we said, Thieneman with the first team, obviously, and then Anthony Brown was the guy with the second group. And
yeah, I'm gonna cut you off real quick.
Sure.
Salim Turner Muhammad is a name that people probably remember from this point a year ago. He came to Purdue from I believe Stanford.
Yep.
And had some hype behind him. Injured and never played it down last season. So now now this is his last season of eligibility, and can he make the most of it? I mean, when you go somewhere with 1 year eligibility, you're hoping to play a lot and make a name for yourself, and hopefully get to whatever your next ambition is, playing pro football for a lot of these guys, or getting into being a grad assistant somewhere, whatever it might be, if you want to stay in the football aspect. But that's a name I'm interested to see how he's used, because he was a guy last year that we heard about, the spring and the summer, I guess, kind of leading up to the season opener.
And I don't disagree with what you're saying about the secondary needing to take shape. I think it is kind of already happening. It's one position group where, and I'm coming in with more of a blank slate than anybody else who's covering this team right now, frankly. But it's, as I'm just kind of like organically looking across the team, that starts to be a position or a position group where cautiously, I think the confidence is starting to build there a little bit. Obviously, Thieneman at the back covers up for a lot of things. He's just one of the elite players in the Big Ten. Green has impressed me through the first week or so of camp, and I've tried not to let that be like the 5-star top 50 whatever bias that plays into things, because there's a reason also why he didn't ever get on the field at Georgia. I know there's a lot of talent there, but he just didn't have a big role there, and that's why he's at Purdue. But at the same time, he has played, I think, with a confidence and an aggressiveness. And Ryan Walters bristled a little bit after Monday practice, because I asked him, "Hey, we've seen Nyland make some plays. We've also seen him draw some penalties." He's like, "What are you talking about? Like, what? How many penalties?" I'm like, "Well,
we saw the only 2 penalties he's had through camp so far, I guess."
Yeah, and you're not throwing a lot of other flags on the DBs that I've seen, but those 2 have. And again, it's all it's not the full context, because we don't see every play. We see just a couple of competitive periods here and there, but. My point just being, like, where do you feel like that line is for him? Do you want him? Is he playing too aggressive, or do you like what you're seeing? And he's like, no, like, I want him aggressive like that. This defense is going to be assertive, and it's going to try to make plays on the ball, as everyone has seen. And once in a while, you're going to take a PI and you just kind of move on. And really, the only one was a PI. The other one was just a dumb. He threw the ball after the play, and that would have been a penalty in a game, so they had him go run. That was just exuberance, and you can coach that out, you would hope. And then you're just going to have to deal with it with some PIs once in a while. I think, and Brown, again, when you start talking about guys like Brown, you're talking about guys like Breedlove, let's be honest, there's positions on this field where they don't have power 4 guys transferring in and rising to the top of the depth chart. They have guys transferring in from lower levels, transferring in from the MAC at important places, and those are the guys they're going to count on. And I think it's fair, until proven otherwise, to have a little bit more confidence in the guys that are transferring in from Colorado, from Georgia, definitely, until you see otherwise. Like until I think it's fair to kind of lean that way. I think there's a good collection of talent starting to kind of coalesce, maybe especially with that number 1 defense, if they can keep that secondary group together. And I think now it's just a matter of, so the one I'm going to move on to is the pass rush. Things have gotten a little bit messed up there, because and it was CJ Madden back at practice on Tuesday. He did not look like he was heading back to practice quickly, because he was not in pads on Monday.
No, he was he had the jersey on. He didn't have pads
Right.
on. He did drill work, or kind of stood off to the side and took mental reps, but he was not a participant.
And he was it was conspicuous that he wasn't in pads, because he was in the drills with guys, just wasn't doing the contact part of them. We don't know exactly what his issue is, but he was doing walkthroughs, and Ryan Walters spoke with some relief when I asked about him, and he's like, no, thank God it's minor. So but he had really started to emerge, just from watching the way the reps were going, as the guy that is probably leading to be opposite Will Helt at that other rush end spot. And without him in the mix, it's maybe hard to get a full gauge. But to me, it's more about when they are in these competitive periods, and this probably won't be a spring. When they say scrimmage at this time of year, it's not a spring game where you separate into two teams. Typically, it's the one offense against the one defense, and it's oftentimes it's like scenarios. It's like, okay, well, you get the ball at the 20, and now you're just driving, and who either you score or the defense forces you off the field, or they'll run 2-minute drills, or they'll run third down scenarios. Like but it's full go. It's real football, not just on air or whatever, or two-hand touch. And this is areas where I think that if they need to start to get an indication that this scheme will obviously create some pressure. That's what Ryan Walters is all about. That's what he's built this to do. But are guys winning one-on-one? And are they winning one-on-one, especially against this offensive line, which maybe without Corey Stewart, we'll get to that in a little bit. We assume he probably won't be practicing on Thursday, just from what we saw Monday, Tuesday. But if you're starting to take, starting guys off of this offensive line, does this pass rush assert itself? Does it make things tough on Hudson Card? Did it make them blow that whistle quickly? That sort of thing. That would be a good step forward for this pass rush at this point. I don't think they have to, anoint starters as of Thursday afternoon. I think it's more about how many guys are showing that they have the ability to get in and cause other problems and be disruptive and get to the quarterback, because it's not that anybody's doubting, and I actually think the defense could be one of the strengths of this team. So it's not like the defense is being doubted, or even that the pass rush is being doubted. But you can't. Nick Scouton's at a different school. Your number 2 guy in sacks is playing Mike linebacker. Not that he won't be blitzed and get after the quarterback too, but some other guys, some new faces have to step up, and Thursday could help Purdue figure out what the hierarchy is right now.
One of the things that defensive coordinator Kevin Kane talked about when we kind of went through the list of rush ends on this team was he mentioned Will Helt as the Terminator, which to me tells me that's probably a guy that you're counting on to be your sack leader. Is a guy that last spring made a lot of plays, had a pick 6 in the spring game. So I think that hopefully solves some of those questions where you're talking about with Jenkins moving to inside, and with Scorton now at Texas A&M. That's 17.5 sacks that you lost or whatever. So you're going to need that to come from somewhere. And one of the things that was brought up, don't replace the player that we lost in football to Texas A&M, because he's an all Big Ten player. He's going to be drafted maybe in the first round and then the NFL draft. But collectively as a group, maybe you can, you don't want one guy to get 2.5 sacks. You need 3 guys to get 2.5 sacks to make up that production, just from several different places.
I am fully advocating for Terminator to be an official position designation. There's a lot of this around college football where, especially with like that bandit or that hybrid linebacker safety position, they'll call it bandit. They'll call it Ohio State used to call it like bullet. The new Ohio State defensive coordinator has Jim Knowles. He's been there a couple of years now, but like his safety names are like adjuster and what's the other one? I've already forgotten this. Anyway, or you'll see like rover. Like there's all these names and they're so boring. Like Purdue needs to set itself apart. It needs to be bold. I would just say, I think the first depth chart they put out should say Will Helt Terminator.
Yeah, that was one thing because of the terminology that's used. And then you get the depth chart. You're trying to match up. I even noted on my depth chart sometimes last year, this, not the name of the position that they're calling it. So that's kind of the fall part that we're in, where we're trying to kind of learn some of the terminologies and things as well. And so, yeah, I'm all on board. Let's put Will Helt in the full Terminator outfit with the mask and everything else and have him come out there and be Schwarzenegger.
Some of the other guys that have been in the mix there, Trey Smith, Sheeta Silla, a handful of guys that have been in that mix, bringing that pressure and working in somewhere either behind Helt, opposite Helt, with depending on what Madden's situation is. They've got intriguing names there, and I'm just curious, especially when you have a few questions up front, you have a few questions in the secondary. The better each of those areas does, it works circuitously. Like the better your pass rush is, it automatically makes your DBs better. The better your DBs are, it gives the pass rush help. And, again, Walters is going to create pressure with the way he attacks. I'm really eager to see that in real game situations. But I think as these two position groups sort of come together, it gives them a chance to work in cohesion with each other. Now, the question is, do they get to that point by, week 3 against Notre Dame, week 4 against Oregon State, week 5 against Nebraska? That, I think, is just a huge little gauntlet early in the season that could determine a lot of things. Notre Dame will be a tough one, but those next 2 games, I think, are there for the taking. And if they come out of those first 4 games, 3-1 after Indiana State in the opener, it opens up a lot of intriguing possibilities for this team. And the more disruptive that this defense can be, giving its offense some help, I think the better the chances of that happening. What other position what other aspects steps up to you as to what Ohio State or Purdue, wants to see on Thursday?
You kind of beat around the bush on this topic, but offensive line, you mentioned protecting Hudson Card.
Yep.
And typically defensive coaches don't talk about offensive players. And yesterday, one of the things Kevin Kane had said off the cuff without being, asked about it, I think I asked specifically about the returning defensive line players. And he said, our offensive line is a ton better than last year, which is good for our defense because now we're going against better linemen, more linemen, especially at the end of last year where they couldn't even practice with the offensive linemen because they didn't have enough players. But he said that's making our unit better because of the talent level there. So that is, as everybody knows, that was an issue just in terms of depth last year, if not talents, but now there's better players, more experienced players, and a lot of cohesion. When you talk about Musa, Hartwig, and Marcus Bowe, that's a lot of starts at Purdue together on that line. So that's huge. And then you fill in Jalen Grant, who was a starter last year. And then, whatever happens with that other tackle spot out there, that's a lot of guys who have played football together. And you hope that can benefit your offense greatly because last year it was a different offensive line unit basically every single week. And you had guys that were playing out of their natural positions, moving from tackle to guard, whatever it might be, just to put the best 5 players on the offensive line to patch together 5 guys for a Saturday game.
So Corey Stewart is the guy that had projected, looked early in camp to be the starting left tackle. Looked like that coming out of the spring, right? And then he has not been practicing. We don't, again, know the nature of that injury for sure, but we know that he hasn't been in the mix the last couple days. And so DJ Wingfield, who looked like the guy who was going to be the starter at right guard, he's been over at left tackle. And that's, I guess, Musa is the one that stepped in at right guard, sort of in his place. I think that's still an important distinction. Now, we don't know, again, how long Stewart's going to be out. Ryan Walters kind of put him under the umbrella of all these guys who are a little bit banged up, but they'll all be back for the start of the season. And if he's the best option there, then that's good news for Purdue. But I also think that if you can take someone like Musa and take someone like Wingfield, move him to left tackle, put Musa at right guard, and still feel like you're getting a cohesive, productive offensive line, that's an important thing to see at this point of camp. So even if the offensive line that they're going to put up ones versus ones in this scrimmage situation is not the one they'll take to opening day, at least in that configuration, to see what your plan B is and how that will hold up, I don't need to tell anybody who's listening to this podcast why that would have been important last year and why you didn't see it last year and what the effect that had on the offense. Like last year, it was hard to keep enough people healthy. They got to the point last year, obviously, where it was unreasonable to sort of ask the plan B to still be working. Like they were going really deep into losing so many starters that what could you do? But if they can get down to where they can go to a 6th or 7th guy and feel like it holds together and still gives them a chance to be a productive Big Ten offense, that's a good thing to see early, especially at this stage of camp where you're only going to be a week in and you feel like you've really maybe turned the corner from where they were last season. So I think Stewart coming back is important. Don't get me wrong. And if he is back by the end of camp, that's good news for Purdue. And if he's back in just maybe next week, we don't know. But getting to see your depth in action, especially if the pass rush is the guys are stepping up there and you're still protecting Hudson Card in these scrimmage situations or in the other quarterbacks too, then I think that is still definitely a positive that you can take out of Thursday even if it's going to be different guys lined up against Indiana State, or it lined up in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we found out last year how important depth is. So right now you're creating internal competitions, but also probably trying to a little bit find guys that are useful at guard and tackle. And, I think Gus Hart, we talked about it last year, because one point I think is like the more versatile you make yourself, the more valuable you are to this unit. So it's going to be, mix and match anyway, probably throughout the course of the season, because guys get hurt. It's just the nature of a physical game. But yeah, right now I think that's something where pretty a staple on, even last year before the injuries, outside of the 3 or 4 guys, getting to the names that the offensive line is like, hey, this is the player that we really like who's stepping up. So now you've got possibly 7 guys, because there's going to be a lot of rotations anyway. As you get into games, nobody's going to play every single snap, or some guys aren't going to play every single snap in the offensive line over the course of a game.
I had offensive line on my list as well, so I'll pick another position group here. And I think there could end up being they're going to go deeper than 3 on their wide receiver rotation, I think, this season would be my guess. But I also think you do tend to coalesce around 3 guys who lead that group. And then which 3 guys do you need on the field when you're down at the end of a game by a score, or you are up by 3 and you need to keep driving and convert third downs to keep the clock going? Like, who are your critical guys to have on the field? I do still think that is something that is very much in the process of being determined. Well, we've talked about the emergence of Shamar Rigby here in camp and how that has been a potentially important development. We haven't necessarily been surprised, I don't think, by the guys in the order that they've been running in. It seems like they're going at least 2 full groups deep of guys who, at the very least, are intriguing and could all potentially work their way into that most trusted spot. But I think this is just the part of camp where, especially as we have seen the secondary start to take shape and make things tough on this offense, who steps up against that competitive situation and makes plays, who shows some consistency, who isn't dropping balls, who isn't making a route mistake, because when you get into the situation Purdue is in, where you might have 5 guys still in the mix for those outside receiver spots, or 2 or 3 guys in the mix at slot, like, who is going to step up and be the 3 guys at the top of that list? It's going to get decided in the margins, maybe, in some of these competitions. And is Rigby for real? Does he step up in a situation like this and keep flashing what he has so far in camp? Or do these veterans say, not today, like, here's what you need to learn, and they expose him a little bit? Like, those are the sort of things. That's why the coaches want these sort of game-like competitive situations in these scrimmages throughout camp, because those sort of things get determined.
Yeah, and, this is the starting Monday this week. They brought in licensed officials, which is why we've seen the flags now recently. Even for the 2 team periods that we're there for, because you want to start simulating game-like situations and separating who's a starter versus who's on the second spot in the depth chart. Jamal Edrin is a guy there that I think has really stepped up and taken ownership as possibly that number 1 receiver. Big dude, almost ran me over on Monday. So that's when I really realized, because he tore his ACL on the second day of camp last year, how big he is. And then I looked down and I said, oh, he's 6'4", 220 or something. He's basically a tight end playing on the outside there. Guy that we heard a lot about last year. And I think that his position probably is solidified. But you're right, as you go down the list, is that, you mentioned Shamar Rigby. Is it Jaden Dixon-Veal, who, was a guy that had a touchdown catch last year? Is it Denilan Morissette, which we now have the official pronunciation on, thanks to Sports Information Director Adam Kufner when we sent that text of sending an audio file back. And I'm forgetting somebody here, but Jerron Tibbs, another guy that was a freshman last year who at the end of the year was getting on the field a little bit. There's you mentioned the 3 guys, but there really is 6 or 7 guys who are probably going to play valuable snaps there, at least right now. And then you're right, when you get into a situation, which those of us who were at the last game at Ryan Field at Northwestern last year saw, they were alternating quarterbacks and some other players throughout the game. And then it became, okay, now we need a win. So then you saw the same unit kept coming out on offense, because now we've got to drive down and get a score, or whatever it is. Who becomes those guys that are the counted on when the game's on the line type of players.
By the way, we had this discussion at camp the other day. You said about almost getting run over. And somebody at camp the other day said that something happened, and they're like, oh, I wouldn't want to get run over by that guy. I don't want to get run over by any of these guys. Like, Keelan Crimmins was standing right there. Keelan Crimmins is 6'3", 223 in pads. On top of that, you would pulverize any of us that are standing there along the sideline. So I don't get run over by any of these guys, and I just want that to be on the record. That's why I'll be safely up in the press box during games. But I'm curious what you think. Like, if you had to guess right now, who the 3 starting receivers are first snap of the Indiana State game, who do you think leads that?
Oh, my. Obviously, Edrin, as I mentioned. I think right now, Jaden Dixon-Veal is getting a bunch of reps with the first team, and I'd probably have to run down the list here. I don't have my notepad with me where I've marked down which groups are working together in a lot of things, but that other position could be several guys probably.
I feel like Andrew Sawinski has been the slot at the top of that group most often. But again, I still think it's up for grabs. I think somebody could, emerge over the course of the rest of camp. You've got
Leland Smith's made some nice plays, but it's been with Ryan Brown at quarterback, it seems like. So
I've seen Watson in there. I've seen CJ Smith in there in various spots too. Like in especially with Smith and his speed and what he can do as far as stretching a defense. Maybe he works his way into the primary group. I don't know, but they do seem to have it's not just a thing where they have a bunch of receivers. It seems like they have a bunch of guys who can make plays and are getting on the field and doing some things. Now I think it's just a matter of which ones do it the most consistently, and do they operate consistently enough once games start that this offense can sort of get going in a more consistent way than it was able to do last year, especially in the pass game. Though that's not all on the receivers. It's not even all on Hudson Card. That offensive line group keeping that intact will be a big part of that too. Any other group that stands out to you or any other thing that you're hoping that you think Purdue needs to get out of Thursday?
The last thing would be for me just the kicking game, whether that's kickoffs. Yep. I know Walter's kind of snapped about I thought our punt coverage was great last year, and that's great, but a lot of people don't talk about, man, that team's really elevated itself because of its punt coverage. Really, we're talking about field goals.
It shows up when you don't have it more than when you do.
That's true.
To be fair, but yeah.
But the field goals, and at the end of last year, Freehill did get a little bit better when he came back from his issue with his leg that kept him out for a little bit. But Spencer Porath looks like the guy who's been getting more of the first team reps. But as you've seen, every time we go out to a camp practice, Purdue starts with Porath and Freehill alternating field goal tries from 20, 25, 30 to however far back they go, and then they go on about their business. So that's going to be an interesting one, and I imagine that it could be a situation where whoever ends up being the place kicker, the other guy ends up handling kickoffs or whatever it might be. So that's an area that's probably to a lot of people isn't a major position or a position to watch, but you're definitely interested when you have a experienced fifth-year guy and you have an incoming true freshman competing for a spot.
Oh, I think it would be not that urgent if last season hadn't gone the way it had. I think because it did, I think fans are definitely interested in what's going on with that position battle. And the thing that maybe they can do Thursday that we haven't seen them do, as you say, we are there, basically as we walk in and they get done stretching, the first thing they do is go over and kick, do place kicking. And it's not it's not fully live. I don't feel like it's a true block coming at these guys, and maybe they get into more of that in a scrimmage situation, because that's, especially in the case of Porath, I think that is a big X factor. It's one thing if you can do it against air, you can kick from 45, 50 yards against air, but are you doing it in pressure situations where they, something we haven't really seen them do is do it from run a field goal situation from like a standing start. You know what I mean? Like everybody's on the sidelines and like they put the ball down, like, okay, everybody get out there and get this kick down from distance. Like that's the kind of stuff that decides games in the balance once in a while. And I think I'm sure that's something that they have worked on in the past. And I'm just saying that's nothing that's happened in front of us. But those are the kind of things that maybe you work into these situations, especially if you're making it like, okay, the offense is driving against the defense in this scrimmage period, and the defense makes a stop on third down, and you just send the field goal unit on and give both these guys a chance to get kicks off in that situation like that. Those are the sort of things, the competitive things that a scrimmage situation allows you, that where you're doing drill instruction, positional stuff, everybody split off into their groups, doesn't really allow you to do. So I'm curious if they'll weave in some things like that, because I think those are the sort of the finishing touches of deciding who should get these jobs.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, because it's a totally different world when you see an offense driving, and you on TV you always see the kicker kicking into a net, and at that time the special teams coordinator is assembling the field goal unit, and a lot of times it's like, okay, we've got to get out there, get set up, and by the time you run in from the sideline and try to set up your line and whatever hash mark you're on or in the middle of the field, you burnt 20 to 25 seconds, and then it really is a rushed situation where you've got 5 to 10 seconds to get the ball snapped and kick a field goal. And if there's not a timeout, that's a very frantic pressure situation, and you've just sprinted onto the field to get your spot and tried to line up where you need to be. So like I said, I'm eager to see who can win that job. And you've got a guy with a lot of experience and a guy with right now no collegiate experience competing for that position, and then throwing RJ Lopez in the mix. He's not been the guy alternating in the field goal kicks, but maybe he's a guy who can kick off, and he's a guy who was the kicker at UCLA last year. So another guy with experience at that spot.
They definitely have remedied the problem of last year where the first guy goes down and then you're very palms up on who's going to be your guy after that. They have some options. Like if Freehill is like your backup guy this season, I think that's a good spot to be in. The bad spot to be in is if Freehill is having problems, and then who do you have behind him? I think you can't put yourself in that situation again, and they already remedied that. Now it's just a matter of who steps to the forefront and kind of becomes the consistent guy that they can count on. Those are the ones that came front of mind for me. We've covered all the ones I had. I didn't put quarterback down only because I don't know that whatever happens Thursday, I don't know if I expect a lot of separation between Ryan Brown and Marcus Davila, but it's something like later in camp, I think would be on my list of, do we get to a point where they start to really see which of those two guys would be the first one on the field, has to be the first one on the field if something were to happen to Hudson Card.
Yeah, and I think right now Ryan Brown probably has the inside track because he's been around the program for a year. I think he played in 2 games. One game was just circumstance where Hudson Card was unavailable, and it's like, okay, we don't really have a number 2 quarterback, so we're going to run 2 guys out there and see what happens, which was Bennett Meredith and Ryan Brown at Northwestern last year. And then I think the other one was the scores out of hand, go out there and turn around and hand the ball off type situation. So Ryan Brown gives you a lot more from a running perspective. He's more of that dual threat quarterback. Davila as a freshman, but big arm, has shown some propensity to be inaccurate and very accurate, which you would expect from a freshman. And Graham Harrell earlier this week or last week, whenever it was, also alluded to the fact that, yeah, you've seen him make some plays when you were here, but he's made some mistakes that maybe you didn't see, which is why, maybe you have a higher opinion of him. And also Graham Harrell's job is to evaluate, and probably he's going to be picking apart the mistakes more than the positives. So yeah, Hudson Card has been the starting quarterback, has been the starting quarterback for, since he got in the first January spring, now over a year and a half ago. And if he's healthy, he's going to be on the field. But you always have to be ready for that quarterback, as we saw last season.
Yeah, and I think if you're Graham Harrell, you're also grading on a curve because Hudson Card is the one that has had to go up against the number one defense. Against in the competitive periods that we've seen, it's been ones against ones, and Hudson Card's getting all the ones reps that I have remember charting. And then it's usually Brown with the twos, maybe sometimes Davila with the twos, but more often Davila with the threes. So it's been a clear hierarchy so far. I'm sure they're mixing those guys in with some one reps once in a while because you have to be prepared for that. But as you're judging what a true freshman is doing against the number 3 defense. We're almost done. I probably should have just kept talking and said, like, well, Sam dropped off. So let's just finish. I guess I should just restart that whole answer I was giving now that I'm trying to think about what I was saying.
The hierarchy of the quarterbacks in camp.
Oh, right. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Oh, Graham Harrell obviously has to grade on a bit of a curve here, too, because Hudson Card's been the quarterback in the competitive periods we've seen, the team periods we've seen. He's been with the ones every time. And it's been Ryan Brown with the twos more often than not. I think Marcus Davila might have snuck in there a little bit, but it's been mostly Davila with the threes. And so what a true freshman's doing against the threes, number one, it's hard to compare that to what the number one guy is doing against the ones, a veteran guy's doing against the ones. I think you're right, though. I mean, we've seen flashes from Davila, and I think there's long-term something interesting happening there. But the consistency of the other two guys has been, from what I've seen, it just has been more consistent from both of those guys. So he can keep progressing over the course of the year. And if you need someone early in the season, I think it's probably Brown. I think if you have this conversation about needing someone in late October into November, maybe Davila has closed the gap by then as he becomes more accustomed to the offense and playing college football and all of those things. But those are the things that if we were able to watch Purdue's scrimmage on Thursday, the things that we would be looking at. We don't know exactly what we will get to see, but whatever we get to see, we'll have a quick reaction up at both IndyStar.com and JCOnline.com, along with all of our other coverage. So come back to the websites Thursday and check that out. Follow us on Twitter. I am at NW Baird. You are at Samuel T. King. He is at Samuel T. King. And we're there every day at practice. One of us, if not both of us. And we'll keep bringing you what we see. So for Sam King, I'm Nathan Baird. Thanks for watching.